Donc là, le prochain talk, ça va être un sujet sur... donc principalement pour les stores qui sont en développement, qui veulent intégrer des ERP d'entreprise. Donc je vais appeler donc Mauricio, qui est General Manager chez Canal Cero sur Seine, pour nous parler de ce sujet. Et autre chose, yes, this talk will be as well in English. Yeah, welcome Mauricio. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, how are you? Well, my name is Mauricio, I come from Chile, and I'm going to present you a few strategies that we found that are good for making integrations with systems as ERPs, right? I'll call them in future systems, yeah, for simplification, right?
The other one, the other way, yeah, that way.
Great. So, well, I come from Santiago. We have traveled 10,000 of kilometers to be here with you. I've been working with PrestaShop since, I think, 15 years up to date. We started with the first version, I think, 1.6. And we had simpler integration just to invoicing, or something more complex, as we have several ways of stores, pickup points that you have to deliver and send an order to the POS, or you have to sync stocks from different places, and so on. Well, Canal Cero is an agency that focuses in these 3 points: data, creativity, and technology. And as I said, we have been working a few years with PrestaShop. Let's go to the interesting part. At first, well, it doesn't look as well as because it's in black, but you could make a simpler module just for integration, right? You could have the install function, register some hooks, and then you use that hook for sending the data, in this case, sending an order. Even we can make it as simple as with just a curl extension, right? But what's the issues that this has? That there is no error handling. If there is no good, if you don't have a correct response, you won't know it. Also, there is API credentials hard-coded, as you can see in the example. And there is a poor separation of concern, right? The same class is making everything to send to the other place. So when you are on a night and then the customer calls you at 3 a.m., my system doesn't work, right? We have no stock integration, or the orders aren't being dispatched, you are in a big trouble. So to avoid this, we will give you a few steps that I think that they could help you in that day. And obviously, you have to see the integration not only as a script that you have to work, but as there is an issue that's failing with the business, right? When you don't have a stock, you have angry customers. They can't buy what you're selling, or your customers. When you're not sending the orders, they are not being delivered to them, right? So you can comply with for example, 1-day delivery promise, and so on. And like errors, you can repeat what happened, so to fix it. So to avoid this, you have to think smart. You have to think not only as a simple script for integration, but also to make it work with a few steps. And these, I think, they are the steps that you could use. We have resumed it in this file. First, you have to define a source of truth. In what sense? For example, in the ERP, it's the boss for everything that's called about the stocks, the invoicing, right? And also like product information. But they usually don't have fields for meta fields or for descriptions or good images. They are made for retail, for POS, right? So in that case, that type of data is good that PrestaShop handles. The second is you need to use timestamp and versioning, so it's easier to make the sync between these two systems, right? Between the PrestaShop and the ERP. For example, if PrestaShop is updated and ERP no, you need to make that send the data from the ERP to PrestaShop, and so on. But there can be another changes about it. You need also in step 3, apply change tracking. You don't need to send all data. If it goes to the end of the day and you see you have 10,000 of products to sync, don't make a job that will sync all of those. Just sync the delta, the changes that is going to happen. Also, something that happened to me recently, avoid circular updates. In what sense? If you don't know who sent the update, for example, PrestaShop sends something to the ERP. The ERP sends it back. PrestaShop sends it again. You have a loop. You will never stop. So you have to avoid that in a way. And lastly, use jobs for reconciliation. There could be a way of doing this that is, for example, once a week, you need to look at all the orders that have been synced and send them to PrestaShop and so on. I'll go in detail in the next slides. So as I said before, it's important to handle this as a system and not just as a script. Here's some code. I think it looks better than the last one. This is just some draft about what you can do. But instead of sending all of them, like 1,000, 10,000 of records, make them in small chunks, right? In 100, and test them. Make a small job that only syncs those 100 jobs. And if they have an issue, you can fix that instead of repeat all the process. The second one, only sync the deltas. When we are updating products, for example, there are a lot of products that hasn't had a change, for example, in descriptions or in the images. So instead of syncing all the products, you can look at the date of the last modification, right? Sync, and use that for sending the data to the other system. Remember, these are drafts of code. Don't take them just as they are. Things about concurrency, if you have some extensions working in PHP, right, you can make run workers in parallel to make the synchronization. And also, like you are chunking, making small pieces of synchronization, you could send them to different workers and then reunite that info. There's a lot of data that is cached, like descriptions of images, that they don't change a lot. It's only if you're working with a retail that makes new collections every 6 months or 3 months, that could be an issue. But in general, it doesn't happen. So that is good to make a static fingerprint. You can use something like use a function like SHA-1, right, to save the description and other fields that you know that they won't change. And then you make some comparison with that. And it's easier to use something like that to compare instead of updating everything in the process. I'm not going too fast, right? Or should I make a bit slower? No? Okay, great. Sorry for my English. The next step, I haven't tried this one, that is to make a compression of every data sent, but mostly is to make, when you have a large JSON to send to another system, better you can make some compression if the server accepts it, right? And this is super important, something that even happened to us. If you're making integration between systems, making granular tasks, you need to have some sort of monitoring, right? What's happening if they are taking too long about your average or standard deviation, right? You have to define which time will you make it, at least if the task worked, why it was a bit more slower than the average. And that could be something that could be interesting to you to have. Going to the last steps, something that I think is something really powerful is the use of queues, right? Because you can have some sort of history, everything that changed. What did you have to do in that task to send to the other system? And you can make it repeatable, right? Because you have all the history of the classes that was touched and the info that was sent. And in that line, it's super important to make asynchronous queues, that they are not working with the front office or the something that happens in the backend. And you can make a small cron job that runs every X seconds, right? That makes the synchronization process easier. Even you can have another server that is making this synchronization, but it makes it outside of the module main functions. Also, we made a small demo project that is in GitHub that you could look up and use it as a working example of how do we make integrations. Any PRs are welcome, so if you want to read it. And this is something that we like to say is, let's make integration boring. We don't want them to move to have something that they just works, right? We don't want them to be excited. So thank you. I hope it was something interesting to look.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Any questions on the audience? Because I think we have a little time left. The next meeting should start in 20 minutes. So just no questions on your side? Nope. Okay. Thank you very much.